talk similar today, in particular, the meaning of the African node, the node for African thought. Um, you as a student, you have realized there is a hub of convergence of African ideas, developmental, but also the dissemination of what normally have. It also establishes a framework for research and community engagement. So you have a role to play as the people who take forward changing ways things are done and bringing into the center the aspect of the, the wealth of the African ways of doing things and revolutionizing the way we do research through the combination of the challenges that the communities face and the you being the ones to think and you think of the solutions from the point of view of what is existing as the indigenous knowledge. With that, we have taken note of what it is, and now we move forward to the next engagement, where we have Professor Sibo to take us through decolonizing and transforming academic spaces, the students' role that you play in doing so. With that, let me welcome our speaker, and let's give him a stronger clap. Professor Sibo, welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. May I suggest that the people in the back should actually come this way so that we are more close to each other as we engage ourselves. I thought I'll start by indicating why we're here and why we should be here, and also to indicate the importance of being on time if we are going to be taking ourselves seriously. The idea of decolonizing the academy comes as a result of our history. We do not get here as the student of this university or the students of all universities in this country who have called for decolonization without a particular history. The history of Africa is the history of colonial oppression. And before you can talk about decolonization, it becomes very important that we should take a step back and look at what has happened to African people. We are the children of the Mandelas, the Tambos, the Bikos, the Sobukos, people who support themselves to say the black condition in South Africa is an outcome of a particular tragic history, the history of subjugation. But that subjugation was the total in its expression. It was not only a subjugation in terms of only taking the land. It was also affecting every institution that African people have. So it's very important that when we talk about decolonization, we must understand that aspect. It is that history that led people like Ngugi Jogo, who died recently, to talk about decolonizing the mind. And when he talked about decolonizing the mind, it is about decolonizing the mind of Africans. And as part of paying tribute to Ngugi Jogo, I thought that it would be important to go back to some of the work that he had written. And I think any university that takes itself seriously will ensure that Ngugi is actually read or Ngugi's work become part of the engagement. Having said that, I also want to underscore what a university should be about. And for that, I thought I would go to what Professor Jonathan Johnson, a friend who I find myself disagreeing with recently, who has written about what a university is. And I want to quote him. He says, a university ceases to exist when the intellectual project no longer defines its identity. A university ceases to exist when the intellectual project no longer infuses its curriculum. A university ceases to exist when the intellectual project no longer energizes its scholars. So it says that for us to have a true university and where there's academic freedom, we must underscore the importance of the intellectual project. Copy. I don't know, I don't seem to see my slides moving. I just want you to be able to follow me, and I can see that there's a problem with the connection between the screen and what you have. Okay, what is this result? One of the biggest challenges that Africans have always faced is an issue of doubt. When you meet an African anywhere and you want them to express themselves, to express their thinking, they will always start by putting what white people have written as a form of justification. Even when you look at your books, you look at who you read. What you read is mostly an expression of doubt, where you have to say knowledge is knowledge if a certain white male, most white male, has said this is how it should be. And that is an expression of doubt that we need to address as universities, as academics, and as students emerging from these universities. And this is where the whole continent has actually failed us, or our partners have actually failed us, that they have been people who are disseminators of that sense of doubt among the African children. He says we should be patient and be able to sort it out. Yeah. So I was going back to the notion of what university is supposed to be. That within the university is not only about reading, it's also about thinking. And when we talk about the thinking, we're talking about the intellectual quotient, and that is very important. And when we don't emphasize the ability to think, and where university students go and simply pass exams, what would have done is a great disservice to our students. If you read Albert Einstein, he talks about the idea of imagination. You need to have people coming out of universities being able to imagine. And if we fail at the level of students being able to imagine a different reality, then as a university would have failed. This is why Dr. Johnson says a university ceases to exist when the intellectual project no longer defines its identity. And this part of engagement, led by Dr. Brown, when he talked about transformation, at the heart of it is whether African can enter the space as thinkers, not absorbers. And Nguni wa Kiongo, in his reflection on the history of African people, he says the most amazing thing that led to the emancipation of black people, he says it is the centrality of ideas, the ideas of freedom. And he says, in the struggle for emancipation, the role of the intellect, of the mind, of the idea, a caring idea, a committed idea, ideas that capture essence of the historical moment, was an important and it says often decisive ingredient. But you need to understand the import of that. That change has occurred because some people took it upon themselves to imagine a different reality. And Budi says the ideas that capture the essence of a historical moment was often a decisive ingredient. If you go back to your own history that you may have been aware of, we've had the fees must fall. We've had the roads must fall. What that movement did was to capture the idea of doing away with the status of parties, the status of historical of colonial history, was what we call a historical moment. That idea was able to change. And today, those of you who are on NESPAS are able to benefit from that moment, that historical moment. But that moment could not have occurred without there being an idea. So when we talk about a university, when you merge, you should be able to speak about that concept of what are the ideas that are galvanizing your behavior. What are the ideas that are essential that when you think about the future, you want to say, these are the ideas that move us from where we are to where we used to be. In the struggle against colonialism, what we did was to fight against what we call physical oppression of people. And the Winston Churchill in 1943, addressing the University of Harvard, was able to imagine what we'll be facing today. And he says, the empires of the future are the empires of the mind. That the colonization that we have experienced for the last 500 years in Africa is going to metamorphose into something else. It will be now the capturing of the mind. And the target is the African mind. The colonization of Africans has become a new form of engagement by the former colonizers. That the other half of colonization is the mind of an African. And this is why Winston Churchill was correct to say the empires of the future would be the empires of the mind. Now, I want to illustrate how this manifests itself. If you look at the continent, Africa, and you think about Africa in terms of the resources, there are no resources imaginable that cannot be found in the continent. Africa is a very rich continent with both natural and spiritual resources. As I said, we have everything that the world needs. But the irony, the paradox of Africa is that despite Africa being a rich continent, it is also a home to the world's poor. That the poorest people are found in a very rich continent. This is the irony. You know, it is what the Bob Marley says, the irony of people being next to the river, but being thirsty. That how does it occur that it could be a richest continent, richer than any other continent, and yet you remain the poorest? And the answer is not difficult. First, that despite our abundance of richness in terms of flora, minerals, and fauna, and also the spiritual nature of Africa. At this point in time, 2025, 80% of the world's poor, 80%, the center of gravity of poverty is found in Africa. In spite, and also when you come to South Africa, where we are, when you talk about poverty, poverty has a black face. And when you talk about a university, the university must be seized with saying, how do we change this African condition? The African condition that is defined by disadvantage. So when people talk about the people who are disadvantaged, they have in mind the color of those people and the color of poverty, the color of disadvantage is black and an African. And then Professor Debate will talk to you a little bit later about what he calls the epistemicide. These are big words that you must also become familiar with. Because in those big words, they carry certain weight in terms of concept. And our job or this university from, as a note for African thought, is to reverse the damage or to reverse what we call a pesticide. So when we can talk about the university being a site for epistemic freedom, I would not deal so much with the whole notion of a pesticide and leave it to Professor Begin to explain what that means. That there has been a serious vandalization of African people, not in terms of only land, but also in terms of the spirit, also in terms of the culture, and in terms of their whole being. The intellectual capacity of African people has been irreparably, but we hope that it is still prepared, so vandalized. But what we have seen is the absence of agents. You know, those of us who come from the Black consciousness movement, one of the things that the Black consciousness movement did, and you could also say the same thing that you saw in the life of the Mandelas, was to ensure that there is a situation where you retain your own agency. What is it? I'm going to throw here. The concept of agency is where the concept of agency is where you define your future and you make sure that you deliver on that future. The history of Black consciousness was informed by the fact that African people had been reduced to where they are a share and their future is defined by other people. So the idea of agency, which has been standardized, is what the university, like the University of Britain, must be able to. If universities in Africa do not address the issue of agency, then the universities would have actually failed. I'm deliberately taking my time so that I want to zero on the idea of thinking. So let me just move away from this slide. The point I'm making is you are a people who belong to a very rich continent. At the same time, you are a people that is very poor. Africa's people are the poorest in the world. There was a time when the center of poverty was in the east, when the center of poverty was in places like Bangladesh, China, Indonesia. But since in the last 40, 50 years, the center of gravity of poverty has moved heavily to Africa. So when you talk about underdevelopment, when you talk about disadvantage, you are talking about an African. And part of the reason why Africa is poor is because during colonization, Africa was reduced to being a place of extraction of its resources, its minerals. And post-independent Africa, the same colonial project of reducing Africa to be a place of extraction remains. Even today, Africa continues to be a place of plunder, where its resources are taken as they are, and then they're taken out there. Let me give you a good example. Africa at the moment produces about five, it produces coffee, which is worth about $5 billion. And that coffee is taken out. And when it's taken out, it gets processed externally. It's 5 billion. It gets processed outside. It gets branded. It gets marketed. But the process of processing, branding, marketing happens outside Africa to create a $100 billion industry. So you have your resources that you take as they are, and you take them out, and they create industries that are external to Africa, that make those countries rich, that create jobs in those countries. So the entirety of Africa at the moment is still along those lines. We are still colonized, so-called post-independent countries. The colonialism continues. This is why your president, when he was talking to Trump, was telling Trump that we have rare materials that you can get. Because in his mind, he's still so colonized that he cannot think of Africans engaging in the process that the West has with our minerals, which is processing the minerals and creating jobs in the process of creating industries. So when we talk about reversing the legacy of coloniality, is to make sure that we disrupt that economic pattern that was created. And at the moment, despite the fact that the first country became independent in 1957, the pattern, economic pattern remains the same. So the Africa remains a primary producer of raw materials. And as a result, we continue to be indebted to those who are manipulating all those minerals, including the ideas that emerge from the continent. It is no accident that as we speak, our by external agencies, that what we do is not because we want to do it, it's because we are told to do it. So that's why we are a country of disadvantage. And in terms of scholarship, what we do when we talk about scholarship, all we do is we mimic what happens elsewhere. When you hear African scholars saying, I'm published in New York, it's simply saying, I have published in spaces where white people publish. And the white people, when they publish what they publish there, they publish that to sustain and to advance their own interest. What we do, we simply mimic. So the whole idea of the Note for African Thought is about disrupting that pattern of mimicking what other people do. You know, in the past, when you were a professor at the University of Zululand, you will find that your students, your kids, will go to the University of Zululand. Because the University of Zululand, you would have taken it seriously as a place of learning. When you are a teacher in Kwagagana, you'll take your children to a school where you teach. But what we do now, we take our children away from where we work because we have doubt about what we teach. This is why post-1994 black parents were busy taking their kids out of their own communities into white spaces. It's all the process of when they are there, they start behaving like white people. They will mimic. And when you hear a black person speaking with an English accent or any other accent, we think that's a mark of intelligence. And this is what mimic means. You have defined yourself as a child of a lesser God. And even our own education from primary starts by saying to the African child, for you to succeed in life, you need to speak a language that's not your own. And other people, the Germans, they learn in their own language because they don't doubt themselves. The Chinese do the same thing. The Indonesians do the same thing. The Japanese do the same thing. But when you come here, we don't see them in their own language because we have really accepted that we're children of a God. So our participation in knowledge is all about is an outcome of the colonial disruption of the way Africans lived. And when we talk about the university being decolonized, we are simply asking for nothing more than, or our students are asking for nothing more than to say, can we be treated also as equals or as people who are not junior to other people? That is what decolonization ultimately comes down to. We have seen how our leaders, I like to use this slides, where when our leaders go to places like Europe, and they are always called to Europe, and they go there, and they go with great excitement. When the Queen died, they were all rushed to go and take the Queen. And when they got there, they were put in the bus. You can see the driver of the bus was the president of Zimbabwe. And you can see how happy our leaders are in the bus. But when they come here, there's a conflict. They treat themselves as if they are important. But when they go to the master says, no, you guys must just get into the bus. They are reduced even today. This is what colonialism has actually done. And other leaders elsewhere, they are not treated this way. But our leaders are so happy to be treated that way. So when we talk about decolonization, we don't want to produce those type of leaders in you. We don't want you to be thrown into a bus and be disrespected and then be so happy that you are disrespected. That is a sign of joyous. So you need to understand that our leaders remain prisoners of the past. And as Decolonisation put it, the best way to keep a prisoner from escaping is to ensure that he never knows he's in prison. Now, I want to touch on what colonization is so that you know what the decolonization is about. You should be able to understand it in the most simplest terms. And the simplest term of what decolonization is, or the colonization process, it involved one thing. One, it was a violent invasion by the colonizer of the native lands. And the purpose was very clear. It's a violent invasion with one purpose, the purpose of exploitation of the natives' human and natural resources. Now, you need to understand that when people were coming to Africa or other places that were colonized, it was not an act of generosity. Hence, there was violence. And to sustain colonization, you also had to be violent. So the first part is that encounter of a violent encounter. But the intention is the total exploitation of African people or the natives and their natural resources. The second aspect, to sustain colonization, you had to dehumanize the African or dehumanize the colonized. And you also had to destroy their culture. You have to produce an African who is ashamed of their culture. And if you look at our leaders and the educated black people, they try to be as European as they can afford. And the part of it is the success of colonization that takes you away from your people. And the more you are distant from your people, the more it is seen as a form of education. But the intention of dehumanizing the African is to reduce the African into a status of an animal. And once somebody has been reduced to the status of an animal, it doesn't matter what happens to them. Whether they die in large numbers, whether you kill them, they are after all animals. And it is very important to understand that the universities played a role in the dehumanization of African people. It was universities that made an African child think that they are subhuman. It was universities that studied, even the best universities, where the universities wanted to show that Africans are not, they may look like humans, but they are inferior to what a full human being is. So when we talk about the transition of universities, we must we must go deeper into saying what are the assumptions of those universities about African people. This is why in most of our universities, even today, they don't statues of people who colonized us, people who were responsible for genocide, for the killing of our people. The universities are named after those people. We have Rhodes University, where the people who go to that university, including black people who go there, are so proud of Rhodes, even though Rhodes destroyed the African child, destroyed African people, took their land and oppressed them. And you build a university and you're so proud to be from that university. That's how far the damage has occurred among the Africans. That even when they are dehumanized, they embrace the dehumanization. So that is what is most important about the colonization. It's about the African must ultimately internalize the whole dehumanization and the destruction of self-worth. And then Rudy goes on to point out, and this is a very important slide, that the colonization, what it did was to target the mind of the colonized. People put it also sharply to say the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. That targeting your mind becomes very important. And that targeting of your mind is done through education. Education becomes an instrument that enables your integration into a colonized space where you accept that being educated means you must move away from your people, from your culture. This is why the most black people who are proud to be who they are demonized. And in this country, you only have one president who has never apologized for being who he is. All other presidents have tried to go into white spaces. Many of us, when we become wealthy, we move to white spaces, even in spaces where they don't even want us. The only president who has never apologized for being Zulu or African, you know that president. And that president get demonized, denigrated, because his point of departure is not whiteness. But when your point of departure is whiteness, you're going to be praised because you're the type of a black person that you want, the most colonized black person. who looks down on his own people, on his own culture, on his own language. So Guki says the colonization targets the mind of the colonized and reproduces intellectuals and academics who are beholden to coloniality. The more colonized you are, the more you are praised. And this is why Africa is where it is today. When African leaders go to the United Nations, when they address the UN, they stand there, they show how colonized they are. They will go and speak in English, and you can see how proud they are. They go there and speak in French. They go and speak in Portuguese. But all other leaders, they speak in their own language. The president of China, even though he can speak English, when he gets there, he speaks in Chinese. The same applies to the president of Germany, or the chancellor of Germany, or the president of France. Because what they're saying when they speak in their own language is to say we take ourselves seriously. Only Africans are the people who don't take themselves seriously. And if you don't take yourself seriously and you look up to other people, they have no choice but to look down to you. So, Professor Brown, if we're going to say we've transformed our students, it will be when we produce students who don't apologize for being African, students who are proud of their heritage, students who do not see speaking their language as a problem. But at the moment, Africa is poor because that is what colonial is the best time to produce that type of African who cannot even imagine himself or herself outside the master's thinking. So effectively what we're saying is that the entire struggle, political struggle, was a political struggle. The next struggle, the decolonization struggle, is about reclaiming our minds. So when we talk about reclaiming our minds, we must understand that that is going to be a difficult struggle. You'll find that you're not going to be fighting with the colonizers. You are going to be fighting with your brothers who are colonized and who are happily colonized, who are happy to even go and spy and become influence to the colonizer, to your own destruction. The enemy of the black person today, the biggest enemy of the black person today is the black person. And then that enemy comes in the form of the most colonized. South Africans, here's a simple example. Black South Africans constitute more than 70% of this country, almost 80%. White people constitute only 8%. Yet, white people control more than 70% of the land, led by a black government. And when you have to talk about the return of the land, the apologists, those who will fight against those who want to talk about land, will be black people themselves. That's the extent of colonization. And when you find black people, you find them congested in small spaces, concentrations of poverty. That's where you find it. But when you drive from here, you go to Johannesburg, you pass land that is open, but it's owned by a few white people. And there you have the so-called rule of law that is written to ensure that happens. And the defenders of the rule of law would be black people. They defend a law that hates poverty among the old people. The law that creates a sense of landlessness among the old people. So when we say we are going to talk about decolonization, it's to be sure that we reverse that impact of colonialism on African people. But the colonialists were always very clear. And Dr. Woodson put it very nicely. He says in the book that the miseducation of the Negro. And I would like to read this so that you can capture it properly. He says, when you control a man's thinking, you do not need to worry about his actions. You do not need to tell him not to stand here or go yonder. He will find his place and will stay in it. You do not need to send him to the back door. He will go there without being told. In fact, if there's no back door, he will cut one for his special benefit. His education makes it necessary. Now, the type of students we produce in Africa are largely the least educated black people who enter the world at the back. And as long as they are in there, they are paid. But they know their place. And this is what I call the notion of the permanent state of doubt that black people have. So the Carter Woodson is simply repeating what Ngozi was saying, that the target is always the mind. But when I control your mind, I don't need to be there anymore. So in Africa, you have the colonialists who have left Africa, they live somewhere, but they still control it because they made sure that before they left, and they made sure that they control the mind of the people, who will then go and call Europe to ask whether this is the doing. They will ask for permission. So you no longer have to control it. So let me put this way. One of the things the writer said that one of the biggest mistake we made, we thought that by removing colonial administration we would solve the problem. But we removed colonial administration to replace it with new colonial effects. You remove Van der Merwe, you put the person who thinks like Van der Merwe, and the result becomes the same. And when we talk about decolonization and decolonizing the mind, there's a book that we have in the library by Chinese called Decolonizing the African Mind. But I would like to read what he says in terms of what is the objective of decolonizing the mind. He says the central objective in decolonizing the African mind is to overthrow the authority which alien traditions exercise over the African. I would like to do that again. The central objective in decolonizing the African mind is to overthrow the authority which alien traditions exercise over the African mind. That all traditions seem to have authority on Africa. This is why the African, you had the president who spent most of the time quoting big white people to show how educated he was. That is simply giving authority to alien tradition. And when you quote the proverbs in Zulu, you are seen as a backward. When you quote the proverbs in Sepedi, in Sesotho, and all that, you are seen. But as soon as you quote Shakespeare, or then you are now speaking with authority. And this is what the Chileans were saying, that the whole idea of ensuring that we decolonize is to overthrow the authority that alien tradition. But you can now extend that, Dr. Brown, to say to what extent are our books about cementing the alien traditions. When you talk about history, if you go to places like the United States, when they talk about history, they talk about their own history. When you go to England, you read, they talk about their own history. When you go to Japan, they talk about their own history. When you come to Africa, you talk about the history of white people. It is what Chiles was saying that day. We are still trapped. We have not been able to overthrow the authority that alien traditions have over Africa. It does not mean that we should not learn about them, but they should not, we must deprive them of the authority that they have over that they exercise over the African mind. So that is what decolonization is. If there's one slide that you will remember, it will be this slide. That what decolonization is all about. That yes, you can start out of interest, but you must not allow alien traditions to exercise authority over your own. But unfortunately, most of our people suffer from that. In this country, we have also a leader of the a prime minister in this country who never chose not to beat about the bush. And he was very clear, very good when he said, when I have control of native education, I will reform it so that natives will be taught from childhood to realize that equality with Europeans is not for them. I want to leave it there. It says they will be taught from childhood that they're not equal to white people. And most of us behave exactly that. Professor Debakin was telling me about an event that happened 2 days ago, where in Parliament, a chair of an ad hoc committee was telling another member to speak in English, not in Zulu, because he excludes many people. It takes an African to say, no, 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 you must speak in the language that you don't even understand. When a person wanted to speak in the language that makes sense to him, a language that he has been given by God, it takes a black person to say, God made a mistake. You must speak a different language. Unfortunately, the member of parliament refused and continued to speak in Susu. That we have a duty and to tell truth, the people we try to impress are not impressed by us. And the example that I would also try and probably goes down with is a friend of mine who was an academic who was going to France. And he's a white man, he spent most of our afternoon learning French. Then I asked him, well, what is this fascination with French? Then he reminded me that, no, I'm going to France. Then I asked him, how long are you going to stay in France? He says he's going to stay there for 2 weeks. He's going to France to learn for 2 weeks, but he sees the need to learn French. Then I said, this is very interesting. And of course, I wish him luck in this learning of French as a white man. And I said, why you are learning French? I said, you are learning French because when you go to France, the French are not there to serve you. They are not there to serve you. If you can't speak French, you are going to strike. But if you are born in this country, you have never bothered to learn my language because I exist to serve you. So most of us who pride themselves in speaking English or any other language, we exist to serve the people who have no interest whatsoever in learning our language. I repeat, most of us who pride ourselves in speaking English, we do it so that we can serve those who don't give a damn about our language. And this is what we send our kids. So we are the most colonized in the continent. Actually, the most colonized Africans are the ones who claim to be educated. And the second thing that I want to emphasize that the good people put is that we will realize that equality with Europeans is not possible. And as a result, we spend more time trying to prove that we can be equal to white people. And when we do that, we fail to understand that by trying to be equal to other people, those people set the agenda. Because they are already white, we are trying to be like them. And would you put it this way? It says it makes no sense for you to try to be white or English. Because even a hobo who speaks English is going to be more English than you. So it says, forget about trying to be. And here's the trick. Ngugi, who had written a lot of books that were in English, and they were able to be put into, they came up to be a million copies. Towards the end of his life, he decided to write in Ulu. And somebody in Britain asked him that day, Ngugi, why, with so many of the people of the world reading your books, why would you write in Ngugi? Why not continue with English? And Ngugi responded, he said, I'm writing in Kikuyu because I am Kikuyu. And he asked, would you ask Shakespeare why is he writing in English? Will you ask a German writer why are they writing in German? Will you ask the Japanese why they're writing in Japanese? And the answer is no. You won't ask those people. But Ngugi says, I write because I want to address my people. And I'm going to address them in the language that I understand. In the same way that when Shakespeare wrote, he wrote for the English people in the language that the English people will understand. And so those people who want to understand what I wrote, they can translate what I wrote. But my primary community, my primary audience are my people. And when we talk about decolonization of higher education, we are talking about education that makes the African people our primary concern. That we are writing, we are studying the Africans so that we can uplift the Africans in the same way that all other countries were able to uplift their own people. So that is what is at the heart of what we call decolonization. Now to summarize, decolonization of higher education is simply an act of reclaiming our right to be, our right to be Africans without being apologetic. A decolonized curriculum will be a curriculum that at the center of it will be about African people and their development. And we are lucky to have gone through this process of being a beneficiary of the political struggle. And that political struggle simply means that the struggle for other forms of emancipation continues. Remember that the whole idea of colonizing people is also about destruction of our culture. And it's also about destruction of their sense of worth to make sure that when they enter the world, they enter it doubting themselves. And we are asking for nothing more than reversing that. And in closing, Ngugi says, the bullet was a means of physical subjugation. Language was a means of spiritual subjugation. In Kenya, English became more than a language. It became the language. And all others had to bow before it in deference. Language was not a mere string of words. It had their languages are not mere string of words. They have their scientific power well beyond the immediate lexical meaning. The language, through images and symbols, gave us a view of the world, but it had a beauty of its own. So when we talk about our languages and reclaiming, it's precisely because they define our thinking. They are our mental home. They are languages where we can imagine. And he asked scholars a question about what African literature is all about. And four questions what he asked is that what is that defines African literature? And there were all those, and you can ask the same question, so what is that defines African knowledge? And I will not go into that, but to conclude by saying, by putting what we fail to do, and it's what Malcolm X says. It says, having an opportunity provide either on the front or on the back or in the middle of someone else's bus. Does not dignify you. That if you get into somebody's bus, whether you sit in front, whether you sit in the back, whether you're, it doesn't dignify you. Only when you all have your own bus. And it says that when you have your own country, you have dignity. When you have something of your own, you have dignity. But whenever you are begging for a chance to participate in that which belongs to someone else, or use that which belongs to someone else, even on an equal basis with the owner, that does not dignify you. And what we did in this country, we were so keen into getting into other people's masses. We're so keen into getting into other people's institutions. The only people who chose when they got political power not to get into other people's masses were the Afrikaners. What they did, they created their own institutions. They created their own banks. They created their own systems. They created their own journals. Because they understood that that being in somebody's past is not a sign of dignity. And today, we can't claim to have created things that belong to us. What we have decided is to get into other people's things. And Odilon says, this is the crisis that Africa finds itself. That the master's tools will not be spent on the master's house. So if we're going to talk about decolonisation of higher education or the academy, we must understand that all institutions that we have, they have their own internal logic. If you have an institution that is not expected to be part of it, you will still be not part of it, even if the driver is the person who goes with you. Because the systems never had you in mind. I think I'll leave it there.
I must ask you to give him another one. Thank you so much, Prof, for taking us a long journey, a journey where you have reminded us who we are and where we have come from, and also reminded us of the opportunities and the resources that are existing with us. And also you have indicated what is blocking us in moving. And this is the best forum to receive your advice on the way forward because this is the cream of the community. You, the students, are the cream of the community. The future of Africa lies on your hands. What you have been given, please take note and think of it. What should I contribute myself in decolonizing? Let me repeat. Think. You as an individual, note it down. I have had as to where what are the blocks that is blocking our thinking, blocking our critical thinking, taking advantages of us, taking advantages of our resources. You, as an academia, the cream of the community, what role should you play towards getting that solution? So there will be a session of question and answers, and I will look forward to hearing from you, asking and coming up with opinions as to what should we do to see to decolonize the system that we are in. Before I allow for questions and answers, I want to combine the two talks. So I'm going to invite second speaker, Professor Josea Epakeng from UNISA, to talk to us ways to liberate African languages, indigenous knowledge, and symbolism to decolonize academic spaces. Prof, welcome to the floor. Let's give him a clap. Nice.
Guys, let me just remind you I was not trained as a teacher, so I will not be teaching you, okay? I need a favor. Dr. Zaman, can you stand up, please? I'm sorry, I know you are not expecting this, okay? Okay. No, you don't have to come. And guys, Dr. Zamani, studied with me, okay? Now he's my postdoctoral student, but he's under me and identify. I wanted him to stand up just for you to see that wherever we are, we recognize you exist, and that is the reason what we do. So there is a future, and he exemplifies it. Thank you. Professor Zepe, the reason he left because he is a cook. He asked me to give him my presentation. And after I sent it to him, I can see he incorporated a few of the ideas. So which means I'm begging to be very flexible, not to present as I have prepared. Okay? But I'm also a trained soldier, so I'm going to be quite flexible in my presentation. Because the idea really is that we should be engaging on these issues. There are people who have questions that are burning. They will ask that question. But there are also people with comments and who want to give advice. They should have that opportunity. So if myself and Andy are very short, it's not because we didn't prepare. It's because we want you to engage with us. Okay? Now, I'd like to start by acknowledging the introductions that were made by Professor Brown in their own. But also to point out that a node for growth of African thought is both a badge of history and a mark of hope. It is a badge of history because as African students in an African country, on an African continent, we should not be justifying ourselves. It is something that we should be taking for granted. Just like the idea of African studies in Africa. Those are things we should be taking for granted. But there is a reason why we can't take them for granted. That's why I'm saying it is a process we are engaged in as a burden of. I think your introduction is pointed. I just make sure that I change some aspects of my presentation so that I recognize that this is the first student seminar on colonizing university. And what I'll focus on are just three aspects: history, short history, rationale, and prospects. That's what I would like to do. And in doing that, this would have been the structure of my presentation as it was planned. Remember, we started an hour later, so I recognize that and I respect that all of us by now we are done. this would have been the structure of my presentation. I would like to give a three-phase. I give a historical context and colonial myths about Africa and African people. I give the justification for the right of conquest and move to the principle of recoverability, that is decolonization as a principle of recoverability. And then, of course, decolonizing the university. That will be taken from my doctoral study, which is towards the right to be an African university. So some of these ideas are already captured, elsewhere in some of the publications. So I won't waste my time and your time with that. Now, in terms of the three phases, the first one is that in relation to the note for African thought, students should be interlocutors. From people I've been talking to, it appears, and I stand to be corrected, that the preoccupation with this project is still at the level of management and so on. So students have not actively, intentionally, and strategically engaged the issue. And I take this from that today is the beginning of that process. Because it will not succeed until students are major stakeholders. There is a need for a buy-in into that project. And students' voices should be heard, students' agency, students' self-direction, student self-reflection and choices must also be part of that project. That is very, very important. The second leg of my preface is very simple. I need to come out of the closet. Yes, today. So I'm going to come out of the closet. I am not a decolonial scholar. I've never been one. I will never be one. And the reason is simple. I still pay my intellectual debt to African scholars who have worked over the years on the issue of decolonization. I do not believe that the recent decolonial outroar is the beginning of the work that African scholars have been working on. I still believe in the life of Archibald Elmaken. I still believe in the writings of Dan Nabudere. I still believe in the writings of Paul Otondi. I still believe in the writing of Islam Gondo. I still believe in the writing of Ramsey and many others. So he is Fadola and many others. So in that respect, I will not marginalize these African scholars who have written so much on the issue of colonization. So that's why I think it was important that I come out of the process, because many people see me as a colonial scholar. But I'm not that scholar. Okay? Now, these iconic scholars representing significant figures have in no mean way exposed the nakedness of the hypocrisy and racism of Western European universalism. They have done that. So I still pay my debt. The third leg of my preface to my presentation is that, and I started putting this when I saw the title of the seminar, that decolonization and transformation were prominent. But this is how I look at things. Decolonization, it's generic. Africa was colonized, Asia was colonized, Latin America was colonized. So sometimes when you say decolonization, you are talking about a means. When you are talking about transformation, you are talking about a means. I would rather in future, in keeping with the known for throne of African thought, we never forget the issue of African identity. That is the best thing. It is particularistic because it tells us where we are going. Anybody from Latin America, anybody from Asia can engage in decolonization as a process. They can engage in transformation as a process, but we cannot engage in Africanization. Because that is particular to us as Africans. And by Africans, I refer also to the 6 recognized regions of the African continent. Are we together on that? Now, why are we burdened by this list? You know, as students, whether we like it or not, I had that from yesterday and talking about language is very important. And if you are going to engage the world language, it's good that you must. So I have come up with 3 myths that have informed colonization. And these are big words, and because I also recognize that the students, these are words that must inform our vocabulary. Right? Now, colonization really was informed by 3 colonial myths. The first myth that I have is called Terra Nullius. It's not like we don't have a word for that in Zulu. We do. This means, if I can technical, it means a land belonging to no one. So that was the first stage of the colonialists when they came to Africa. That they found a land that belonged to no one. And we know that is not true, right? The second leg is terra incognita. Essentially implies that the continent was an unknown territory which was unexplored. But we know that is not true, right? The third is called res nullius. It points to a property which no one could lay claim to or have rights over. We know that is not true, right? But that is what the colonialists use. And because of these 3 fallacies that they put together, they justified the right to conquest. That's how the right to conquest works. Now, I will not go deeper into that, but this is what the right to conquest is. It resulted in a way that concept to get a peaceful because they found nothing on that continent. They had to justify destroying how Africans did things. The pesticide really is really the destruction of how people know what they know. That is what a pesticide. You kill the ways of people, the way they know things. But it also resulted in what we call valuecide, the killing of African values. And importantly, it resulted in what we call linguicide, the killing of African. They wanted you to move towards what they call evolve. That means as an African, you must discard everything that you are and become more like a Frenchman. Evolve. That is why we are burdened today with that more of African. Democide, ethnicide, limicide. And I'm glad that in your poster all these areas are covered. But what have been the implications of all this, which is important as students to understand? It means that in our policies, for anything that we do, African education, African philosophy, African economic, political, and jurisprudential frameworks are not considered in making policies. And that has very serious implications for us. But it also means something very important. It means that although Africans are a majority in Africa, they are just a demographic majority. The colonizers are social, cultural, economic, and aesthetic. They are there. But although in numbers they are fewer, but they are the majority in that respect. So we are just there in numbers. But the way things are being done, and those are issues that Prof. Sebe was talking about. Now, I don't want to get into more complicated issues of, my presentation, and that is why I'm skipping some of them. But all what I want to say, given this history, which resulted in the right of conquest, and the implications have been indicated in the form of pesticide, in the form of herbicide, and in other forms. We have to engage in the process of decolonization as a form of a principle of recovery. Now, the principle of recoverability simply means that Africans must pay sovereignty to African scholarship. It is also about Africans ensuring that African knowledge systems are understood as a legitimate pyramid of knowledge. That Western knowledge is not the only knowledge that should be. That is all what these things mean. The reality is that by trying to prevent the emergence of different thinking, different logic, and different worldview, Western universities impoverished the world. That is simple. It impoverished the world, and the need to ensure that we reverse all this. So some people always ask, but after so many years, why are we still engaged in the issue of decolonization? We are engaged in issues of decolonization because I think my Zulu is not good, but I suspect I will get this one right. Ichala aliboli. Istim, again, help. Ikat. Oh, Kosa and Zulu. Oh, yeah. Because in Sutu, we simply say Mulato how so that makes it. So that is why to this day we are still engaged in this issue. As long as we have not solved it, we will continue to engage it. So that is why you see the issue of decolonization and the principle of recoverability. So we have been, now somebody has been interfering and it's not moving now. You see? I think all that setting that we have said, which is consistent with both the introduction that was made by Prof. Brown and the extensive presentation by Prof. Seattle, impels us to engage in the process of decolonization. It impels us to engage in the process of transformation. But let us understand that both decolonization and transformation are a means to an end, and that is Africanization. That becomes very important. Now, the right to be an African university, what does that really mean, and what are the implications of that? That is very important. The right to be an African university is the recognition that Africa is a legitimate site for research, and Africa is a legitimate site for production of knowledge. So what we are trying to do, and one of the things Prof. Brown that I want to just point out, this university must take credit for consistently engaging on that issue, because other universities are not as engaged as you have. With all the seminars, and I've attended all of them, virtually, with all the seminars that we have had, you have actually taken the thinking on this issue to another level. It will be a pity if we don't see books written, captured on all those engagements. But more importantly, it will be a pity not to see their contribution of students to those writings. If there is any criticism I have for the university, is to leave the students behind. Academic project is about them. So how can we have something about them without them? So that is the criticism that I would like to leave you with. The implications, and I'm saying this because the implications of dealing with these issues, which are supposed to lead us to epistemic freedom, is because it speaks to the nature of students that we want to produce, as opposed to the nature of students we have been producing. The type of students that we want to produce out of a distinctly African university. What are those attributes, critical attributes? The first one, which is what we have been talking about, is that our students should be able to dispense, to discard, to throw away what I like to call epistemic xenophilia. Now, most of us are familiar with the word xenophobia, right? Now, xenophilia is the opposite of xenophobia. Xenophilia means love for things that are foreign. Right? You know, xenophobia is fear or hatred of things that. So this one is love for things that are foreign. So we must dispense with that. As we dispense with that, it means we must be able to source our information from our African archives. Why do we know about all these Western writers, but we don't know anything about writers coming out of the continent? It's because we have been made to love things that come from the West. So that is one of the attributes that we like to see out of students. That students don't come to university, and I don't believe that students come to university to learn. That is not an end. Students come to learn as a means, but ultimately, students must be transformed. You come to university to be transformed. You don't come to university to learn. Learning is a means to transforming you so that you can improve yourself as a person, you can improve your community, you can improve your province, you can improve your country as a transformed person. And if we look at students as people who come to university to transform, we will deal with them differently. Students are not an empty vessel, and therefore our teaching to them should be about rekindling the potential that already lies in them. They are not all of them as you look at them. They have different backgrounds, different knowledges, and they bring something to the table. No student at university, even at high school, can be an empty vessel. So it means a different approach to our students. You know, one of the things that I always complain about, every time a master's or a PhD student, right, we always say to them, we want to see the theoretical framework that you are using. But what we don't realize is that most of these theoretical frameworks have been developed elsewhere. So we are asking students to apply theoretical framework that has been developed somewhere. What we are supposed to be doing is to be training students. And if the issue of your preoccupation with African thought is to succeed, we must train students not about theory application, but about theory building. We will never move forward as long as we train students to apply theories that are already in existence. Students must be trained to develop theories. Because when you develop those theories, they derive from your experiences. Now, when you use foreign theories and you apply them to your condition, there is a major problem. Now, I will make this presentation and some of the issues applicable because I don't want to exhaust a lot of our time. So let me just go to the last part of what I wanted to do. Why are we preoccupied like with all the issues of making sure that our universities are Africanized? Precisely because we want them to serve the African continent. These universities, when they were developed, they were not developed to serve the African continent. So we are preoccupied with so that they do. If we don't, universities risk losing their legitimacy. They risk losing their legitimacy. That is why it is important that we align the teaching, research, community engagement, and international partnership with transformation. Universities must be mobilized to shape policy in this country. They must be mobilized to transform communities and advance the struggle for humanization of African people. Remember, Professor said universities were used to dehumanize. So it is our responsibility to make sure that universities are transformed, are decolonized, so that they can be engaged in the struggle for humanization of African people. Now, at the core of transformation, at the core of decolonization is simply the soul of our universities. And I would like to stop there, MC, and hope that we will afford the students enough time to engage with us.
I would ask you to repeat that one because that was a strong one. I like that. We should maintain that. Professor Lepatin, you have really taken us through filling the gap that the previous speaker has taken us through. Remember, I had told you, you have to take note. This is your time. We have been encouraged that you are here to be transformed. Whatever you do is to be transformed to make changes. And the future lies in your hands. The essence of not building you are supposed to take you through on how to build the theory, but not on the application aspect on it. So the challenges are now on you. You have had a lot, and I want now to open the floor for questions and answers for clarity. Show that you are being very active, show that you have the solution, so that you are the critical thinkers that we need to reform our academic system. Thank you. Can I ask for the speakers, those who will be going around, taking questions, maybe 1, 2, 3, and then yes, comment and yeah. Remember, it's comment and questions all combined.
Okay, so I think we have roving mics. As many hands as possible so that we can interact with.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Sito Tsegome, obviously student at the university. I first want to commend, basically, and applaud the university, the DVC, and the Dean for such an event. Because we've been complaining as students that we are in the process of a North African called decoloniality, but the only events we see are for staff members. Are we here to decolonize the staff members or the future of this country, which is the students? So such an event, I have to comment and applaud you guys. It is testament to that us as students are no longer going to be part of the conversation, but we will be leading it and making sure that the future is in decoloniality. But firstly, I want to address these issues that we have as African, we are saying that we're an African university, while we still have certain hindrances with the system. Proxy has said that the central objection in decolonizing African mind is basically to overthrow it. So, which means we as students must overthrow this university system. Because even today, we still have a situation whereby we still recognize pharmaceutical notes from Western doctors instead of our traditional healers. And even when you go to the lecturer, explain to the lecturer that you need traditional intervention instead of medical doctors, the lecturer says that, how can you recognize a witch doctor? Because the policy of this university doesn't allow that. And as you say, Prof. that decolonization is all about reclaiming and challenging our right to be and our right to think. And I think to myself, how can we say that these people are witch doctors? These are certain emphases of our colonization that we are at. Because how can someone be a witch and a doctor? These things are alienating our African values, and we need intelligent policies that will address African values like recognizing our traditional healers as a form of a medical reasoning for this academic phase. And again, to the Dean of Students, if he is available or anywhere to be seen, is that we need our traditional societies, traditional healer societies, Because of last week optics, there were students who wanted a society to be recognized for traditional pillars at this university. But they were stopped and told that there are many processes that need to be done. They cannot establish such a society. My question is, why is it easy to establish a church called CSCI society, but it is hard to establish a traditional healer society? We are still in a long way in achieving being a North African thought if we still have such problems. Now, my second one is that I believe that we need to make isiZulu a predominant parallel medium of instruction language at our university. You know, we need to make it maybe a compulsory module for all first years to learn isiZulu due to our geography and due to questioning and undermining that with English as a medium instruction of language in this university, which is a North African thought. That's my second opinion. The other one is this, that we all know that as African researchers, we are all regarded as data source instead of knowledge producers. So our university really needs to look around, making sure that the folktales we receive from the stories of Africa, the folklores and folktales are recognized not just as data sources, but as knowledge producers, as co-authors in this research. And I believe that by achieving these points that I've raised, we will not only just be a university in Africa, but we will definitely be an African university as a North African thought. Thank you very much.
Program Director, Professor Brown, Professor Sim, Professor, Department Dean of Students, Mr. Mtambo and his team, and the esteemed student at large in the leadership present here, receive my greetings. Prof. Lobato, true, you correct that we are well overdue for this direct collaboration with the student. You see, I always like to say, when you want to say you want to build a home, that you don't engage people that must be the component of that home. Okay. Yes, I always have this problem to say, if you want to build a home, but you don't engage with the pillars that must ensure that the home is stable. What are you actually saying you want to build in a sense? We are grateful for this acknowledgement. Professor said, in your presentation, you made one to remember one of the words that were said by Professor Lumungu when he said, iqhathanisa ama-African isifanisa like chicken ngomasta ungayithatha ilayiphethe ihlukumeze ikhiphe ama-feathers wayo bese uthatha ummbila unikeze izokujabulela lokho, forget the pain that is enjoy it. Like ourselves as African, we are made to suffer, then we are given less, then siyakujabulela lokho. The question that we must engage in, in fact, if I'm said that each generation out of Putin must find its mission as the university. We have a mission now. Are we fulfilled or are we betrayed? I want to pose the rhetorical question. If you want to say we fulfilled, how so? Putin, Tina and Zabantu. The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor, the mind of the oppressed. While indeed, at a phase whereby our mindset is still colonial, we still need to undergo a direct, precise, accurate decoloniality discourse. You see, as an institution, you can never engage on being a living African institution that correctly deliberate on African issues if do we give away the issue of humanity first in our students? Our students, they are having a lot of issues that we must also make it as a part of discussion, making sure that our students truly lead this discussion of being a note with African God. When really an issue of humanity as African, what must be at the forefront of us. Also, how are we ensuring that the decoloniality discourse is fully fledged in itself? One, we must, when we speak about Africa, we must first identify what Africa do we want. Second to that, who must lead that Africa? What brand allow me to look you this one? As a university, I feel we must have the University of Zululand African School of Thought. Why? Reason being, we are saying we want to engage direct in being a living comprehensive institution. Let's speak direct about African matters. Let us have this school of thought that will assist us in the process to bring leaders that will correctly engage in this discourse. One of my most dearest contributions where I come at SASCO says that one member of society before was student Rumi as excellent, women who excellent, they understand the language, the African discourse, African decoloniality. He will go back and start learning and allow us. He will continue with this discourse. That in itself, our institution will produce leaders that will engage this discourse. Let us not mimic it. Let us have a pragmatic, practical problem of action. Last but not least. Also, we must engage direct in curriculum engagement. Why? When we say we want to do an institution that is a not for African body, we deliberate the issues that are faced by Africans. Let our curriculum align and address African issues. Trust me in this one. There is no American man that will come in Africa to address issues of Africa. It needs us and us alone. We must engage constantly about all these matters. Our students must be the center of this discussion. We need to be able to guide, correct our country. The main aim of our institution being a node from African thought is to ensure that we see what is happening in our society. We want to directly interfere with the decolonial discourse. We want to interfere with the coloniality discourse at large. So we will never interfere with it if our students don't own this program. As I sit down, allow me to convey this shortly. As an African institution, we have witnessed and noted that was our brothers and sisters in the University of Doctor of Faith. Professor Steve spoke about the identity. You can never be a South African in particular in order to directly speak about the role and the shared history that the University of Doctor has given to our people. So is the University of Zululand. That must condemn student must not participate as human. We condemn it as an African. Our students deserve way better. Thank you.
Become certified Obama Biga, and I have three very short questions. So actually, two. So to understand my first question is: can academia, which itself is a colonial institution, be fully decolonized? And my second question is: how are student movements for decolonization received by universities? Yeah. The second question was, how are student movements for decolonization received by universities?
Professor Director of House, CFA, Prof. CFA, in your presentation, I think in your presentation, statement you mentioned that us as South Africans, as Africans, we do not subscribe to the concept of decolonization. But look at this very how full it is. I think when we are responding to our questions, we need first to draw that statement. Because the kind of views they do subscribe to the concept of decolonizing the mind. I don't know if you both who said, but we do subscribe to the concept of decolonizing the mind. I have a few questions from in your presentation, especially on book you are talking as ideology, on decolonizing the mind. You mentioned that Ubu said when decolonizing the mind, you mustn't rely on those colonial languages. Mention the so-called English, even make the example that one of the friends was visiting French and he was trying to learn French in 2 weeks. Then I'm asking myself, since English across the globe is recognized as a language of proficiency for communication as one of the skills for communication, what is your take on that? As well as since in labor market, when we are talking about the concept of decolonizing, the labor market subscribe to us, it requires us to be well sharp in terms of those colonial languages. What is your take on that? When we are preparing ourselves for this decolonizing the mind, how do we balance ourselves or how do we prepare ourselves for the labor market? Because as students that are here, I personally I think it's wrong in some way to talk about decolonizing at the social level, where primary, secondary, these such concepts that are to us. But at the social level, you are told about decolonizing. But at secondary, primary level, you are told that you must know English. So I understand that some of our peers here, they were sent by their parents, private schools, to international schools, to go there and study these colonial languages, subscribe to the so-called colonial classics. And how do you balance that? You also mentioned that I think it was a point where you were talking about the inclusion of our African languages, writing our own African literature. You also mentioned about the publication that we must publish in our own African language and literature. Then I asked myself about collaboration. How do we then foster collaboration? How do we then foster global collaboration? If I will, me myself as a native, I like and to make it Zulu. Then I want to collaborate with someone who's a friend or who's a person. Then how do we collaborate? How do we focus? I would say when we are developing the mind, we say down collaboration. And lastly, I think on the presentation, one of the his critique, there was a slide where you were showing us the paradox of how our African continent is rich in terms of mineral resources. And Gomez, he critiques one of the exploitation of our African resources. And the question was, how do we then make sure that we as Africans utilize these resources profitably and subscribe to our historical context and empower African people? How do we make sure that economic empowerment is owned by us? Let's not make it as a context or let's not talk about how do we make it practical. Thank you.
Let's pause at this point on to the question. Let's finish up the first round, and we'll come back for another set of questions afterwards. So there are quite a number of issues raised, and of course, quite interesting ones. I'm going to ask Dr. Jan,
Uh, thank you for the questions, quite sharp questions. And some of them I'm not even sure if they are questions that we oh, some of them I'm not even sure that they are questions that we need to respond to. I think they are pointers to solutions. I'll respond to one or two and leave the rest to observe. The first question that was asked, you asked to control the system. I must say, I went back because it reminded me of a juxtaposition. You know, in 1976, we decided to ban all the shebeens. After banning them, they were in flames. We went to the classroom. 4 days ago, we saw an inverse of that. Students had spotted bathing the classroom and then moving to the shebeen. Now, that's why I went back because I hope that is not what we want. What we want to do is to make sure that we protect these people. That should be what we want for all of us. It's not the responsibility of SRC, it's the responsibility of all of us as students. What we need to do in overthrowing the system is probably looking at the institutional cultures of the institution. And one of the things that I said in my presentation was that I lament the fact that this university has moved so far ahead of many institutions in this country with the idea of African thought and cannot take it away from what this university has done. But I lament the fact that students have been left out. Now, some of the questions that have been asked by students speak actually to them. One of them asked about how the universities perceive or receive student movement, which are, advocating for decolonization and so on. The fact of the matter is that if students were in the forefront of this, there is no need to ask for permission from management to, accept or acknowledge you. The academic project, as we said, is about students. And as such, students must be in the forefront. But that comes with responsibility. That comes with reading. It doesn't come with arguments that are loud but don't make sense. So if you want to be in the forefront of moving towards an African university, you must also read, because you have to drive it. Part of the institutional cultures that one of the students raised here was the issue of using the system of, traditional healing when you have problems and you come, when you submit that, it is rejected. And then you use the word witchcraft, that you cannot accept witchcraft certificate. Now, that in itself is a problem. Professor talked about naming. You know how naming is important. When you say something is a certificate from witchcraft, what you mean is actually that is something that is not acceptable. But it also has implications for sustaining the very system that is trying to oppress you. So that might be an interesting thing, that you put pressure on the system to make sure that these things are accepted. These are African practices. Don't rely on management at all times. Certain things have to be fought for. And I'm not advocating the bailing or chasing people out, but I'm saying, as long as we have good arguments, they must be advanced. And let those who are making decisions come up with counter arguments. So you have a major responsibility to deal with this issue. And somebody raised the issue of Isizu. Why should that still be an argument here? That Isizulu at this university, in this province, should actually be at par with English. That should not really be an argument. It's a question of how serious are we in pushing that. And that is the responsibility. That is part of the reason why we are discussing today. That don't lament, don't always lament. Mobilize yourself. Inform policies. And that's the responsibility that you have. I think from those are the things that I would have liked to add and respond to some so that we have more questions.
Thank you very much for that intervention, my students, in terms of the questions being raised, and also for Professor Patrick to set the framework in which I would approach this. And those are very important questions that we ask. And they should also form the agenda of the next engagement. I want to broaden this discussion by underscoring the fact that we are talking about the decolonization because of the historical moment. The emphasis is understanding that before 1994, the type of education we received was simply colonial education to produce the type of scholars, professionals who are going to maintain a system of colonization. But those who oppressed you wanted you to be an apologist. They wanted you to become apologists of the system. Every system that exists tries to protect itself. The colonial education was not going to produce the type of professional who is going to fight against colonialism. The idea was to produce the type of African who is going to sustain and be beholden to the colonial master. So what you also had was a political struggle. The new form of struggle is a cultural struggle. It's an economic struggle. It's a struggle that goes beyond simply the attribute. So when we talk about these universities, we must also understand that these universities were not introduced by us. They were introduced because the regime felt that for it to sustain, the apartheid regime, for it to be sustained, it had to create structures and institutions that would serve the apartheid geopolitical imagination. So UNIZULU was established for that reason. Hence, you end up having what they call tribal universities. They decided to say, we're going to have 4 tiers for the Xhosas, we're going to have UNIZULU for the Zulus, we're going to have, but part of it, in the mind of the apartheid master, was around the issue of dividing the Africa. So we need to understand that. So the entire struggle, if you go and read documents by the likes of Mandela, you read the speech on the during the Rebellion strike, he talked about the type of education that he received at home. He says that when he grew up in the Transkei, he used to listen to the elders talk about the likes of Mushweshwe, talk about the likes of Hinsa, talk about Cesar Rakola, talk about the Shaka, talk about all the leaders who were united to fight against colonialism. And at the center of that was the unity of African people across the so-called clans and tribes, etc. But the unity was very important. So we have managed to go through one struggle, which was political. But the new struggle is about our right to think. It's our right to reclaim our culture, to reclaim our humanity. Like I pointed out, that part of the design and objective of colonialism was to use Africans to where the African doubts his humanity or her humanity, where the African enters the world as a junior partner, not as somebody who can speak with confidence. So we need to understand that we're engaged in the broader struggle, the struggle for total emancipation. So I wanted to start with that. That we need to emphasize why we're engaged with it. We actually are saying we want to take the support of the people from the people who have worked so hard to make sure that we are free and we're where we are today. So we need to understand it within that structure. It's not there. And when you look at the policy document of government in 1997, they talked about the importance of ensuring that the nature of scholarship that we have is not only about including young black people into the system, but also making sure that that which is taught begins to speak to the African context. Where Professor Mahoma was telling me that when he was young, he did a point called the double deal. And I don't know how many of you know the double deal. And he thought that double deals were best. It was only when he went to England where he discovered that the double deals are flowers. But part of it is the deep contextualization of the what you are learning in class. And some of us went to school and studied physics. Most of the questions will be talking about slow. So as somebody living in Toronto, I have to imagine slow first before I can answer a physics question. So the whole education that I had was not didn't speak to my reality. And a friend of mine who grew up deep in rural Ebola said if they had to write an essay on a journey by train. And he says, I've never seen a train. So you have to imagine what a train looks like. So that, and as a result, when your education is not contextualized, you are shortchanged. And then you also have this test where they say black kids, they read, but they don't read with understanding. And part of the reason why they don't understand is because it's in a medium that they're not comfortable with. But when you talk to them in their language, they're not as stupid as they're made to be. You have black people you have a child who has been killed, and you want to express yourself. and you have somebody coming up with a mic and they expect you to speak in English. And because it's not the language, you come out as if you don't know what you're talking about. But the person knows what they're going through. And if they were to speak in the language, they will speak intelligently. But because it is not their language. I mean, like a guy who was telling the boss that tomorrow I'm going to die. And the boss said, "No, you shouldn't die." I said, "No, I must." You know? He said, "No, but you can't tell the boss when you talk to somebody to come and assist that this guy must not die tomorrow. Only to find that the guy was saying that tomorrow I'm going to be good. You know? So, but now he comes out so stupid. Here's a man who's insisting that tomorrow he's going to die. But it is a language. But if the person expresses himself in his language, the person will not come as stupid as that. So what we have, we are making Africans look stupid by making them express themselves in languages that they cannot even understand, that they cannot even pronounce properly. So when you talk about reclaiming your identity, it's the identity when you wake up, you are who you are. You don't try to do what you're not. But most of the time, we spend time our lives trying to be what we are not. And we're not succeeding. Because you can never be English in as much as you try to be French, Japanese, or whatever. So that I wanted to mention that as broad. But now let's deal with this. The silly questions that you guys need. One is, well, I mean, Professor, if I can raise another issue that I think you guys must pride yourself. You are the only, I mean, I had a professor of Afrocentricity from the US, he says he has traveled through the whole continent. He has now found a university, like the University of Zulu, where the notion of being African is central. What we find in all other universities in this country, when you talk about the issue of Africans, they start creating an African studies department in a course. What they're saying is that, like Edward, they have an African studies department. He said, no, we hear what they're saying, Professor said, you can go to the course. But the majority experience of the institution is largely about European education. But they will accommodate in the fund. What this university has actually done is to say being African should be what defines this university. That no child who's African should feel that this is not a place of an African. If you go to America, the American universities, they make sure that you understand that these are American universities. If you go to German university, you find the same. You go to Japanese university, you find the same. It's only in Africa where your Africanness is in question. So I wanted to mention that this university is the only university where it defines itself not through simply coming up with a department or a unit in the point to say we are going to start from a highest level to say this is our posture, here's the note of the thought. Then the second thing is the issue of traditional healers. Early this year, we invited Professor Kaleli Neba. He is a professor who studied in the UK. His area is biochemistry and chemistry. He has started something within the University of KwaZulu-Natal where traditional healers can give certificates. But in the past, it was unthinkable. But it's something that can be done. So there is nothing wrong in us understanding that there are areas where what we call Western medicine cannot be able to be a solution. And it can be shown that many scientists have actually come to Africa to study the herbs in Africa. It's only Africans who doubt themselves. Africans are largely a problem when it comes to some of those issues. So that is one thing that can be negotiated within the university, and it should be negotiated because Western medicine does not cure everything. So that is to answer the question of what. Then there's the issue of language. Professor Debageng said that should not even be a debate. And as I said to many people, no country in the world has ever developed on the basis of of a foreign language. All countries develop on the basis of their languages. And it is only Africans who think they can develop and become something in a foreign language. So we are crazy people. We are people who need help. Anybody who thinks that they can become number one and the best players in the economy globally on the foreign language are people who are demented. They actually need to have their heads examined. And as somebody who studied physics, I can tell you that nature, with authority, does not write its laws in English or French. The laws of gravity have no respect for language. When I fall, I don't fall in English. I don't fall in German. I don't fall in Japan. I simply fall. So the laws of physics are applicable to all of us, irrespective of the language that we speak. And there's no reason why we cannot capture those laws in our language. Our languages are not incapable of capturing the laws of physics. So that is a very important thing, that one, it is possible. And it has been made possible also by Professor Mahoba when he was at the KZN. He decided to say, ask people like Professor Khaledi to say, you guys who are scientists, can you take one course? And they took chemistry. They decided to translate chemistry into Zulu. And as a result, when they teach what you call chemistry, they teach it in Zulu and in English. And they found that most students go to where Zulu is used than where English is used. But the chemistry is still the same. It does not have to be in English. It does not have to be in Japanese. Chemistry is chemistry. When I was a student in the US, one of the things that I found is that the Chinese students who had difficulties in English, they were the best students of science. And I asked them, how do you manage it? They said, well, for every book that's there in English, we have a Chinese translation. So when I don't understand in class, I go to my own translation, including books that were written by Chinese scholars. So the notion of Zulu being a language of science is not an argument. As a matter of fact, Afrikaans is the youngest language in South Africa. And what these guys did was to make sure that they developed their language. It became an official language in 1925. 25 years later, Afrikaans became a language of physics, language of commerce, language of medicine. So it is possible. What makes it impossible for us is simply lack of political will, because most of us are colonized. So the issue of language is also, as Professor Lebagi was saying, should be a non-starter. And anyway, the medical school here, all students who study medicine, they have to learn in Zulu, because most of their clients will be Zulu speaking. This will be the curriculum. That should be something very easy. We should be asking to what extent are that which study advancing African students. Because those of us who travel international and with travel, whether you talk about Indonesia, India, Russia, US, England, you do find that the type of questions that they deal with have to do with their own countries and their own interests. But the biggest problem is that those who have not traveled actually think that, oh, it has to be English. Let me tell you, I was in Indonesia 2 years ago. They're not speaking English. They can't even, we have to get capital. So the notion of the dominance of English is a figment of our imagination. You go to France, I was lost in France. There was no one who could help me, because all the people, they were speaking French, until I saw an African who came from Cameroon, who spoke both English and French, and he was able to help me. Otherwise, I would not be able to get out of the place where I was. But the long and short of it, the notion of English being international is a creation that we make. And at the moment, actually, in the US students are studying Mandarin. They're studying Chinese because China is the next big thing for them. So for them to be able to converse with the with the Chinese, they are now learning that language. So we learn these languages no more out of, how do you put it, to ensure that we collaborate with certain people, but even within collaboration, there are translations. And second, the last point I made to some of the guys here, is that they make a big deal about English. But you know how many people travel internationally? And the person who was saying that to me is a person who has never been out of the free state. Most of us, 90% or 95% of the people in every country, they remain in that country, they don't travel internationally. Only a small percentage. So you cannot design your education on the basis of only a few people who are going to travel. So it's nonsensical. But also when you travel, you discover that myth of the dominance territory, when you talk to people who are operated by the Germans, they'll tell you about how Germany is international. When you talk to the people who were colonized by the French, they'll tell you that. When you talk about people who were colonized by the Portuguese. So this is just mythology. But what is important is we need to make sure that we retain our right to be. We are not children of the lesser God. We are Africans, and we should be proud to be Africans. And we must have a university that is sensitive to the challenge of Africa. And this is what decolonization or Africanization, which is the next step, where the center comes Africa, and we advance whatever we do through being African.
Okay, thank you very much for David. For responses. We note that we are also running out of time. If you have one or two more questions, would like to, right? Can you forward those questions to, sorry. All right. Can you, would like to hear all the questions? I'm going to make a request that we forward the questions to Dr. Nakaji, and then we will then forward the questions to my office, and then we'll formulate responses in that respect, so that we don't get into the next presentation. So, but just to summarize and say that some of the questions were implying certain interventions, and we certainly will look into some of those as we go forward. This is the first engagement. We won't make it the last engagement, and we know we cannot exhaust everything at this point. So allow us to go back to the program, just to take the last two items. One, looking at the idea of decolonial work, and then Dr. Nokazi will continue, and then the report can so that's there with us one of the proposals. And then,
Thank you so much, Prof. Approved Director, Prof. Joe, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Prof. Brown, my fellow esteemed panelists, Prof. Siepe and Prof. Lebake, the Dean of Students, the student leadership present here, I also saw the SRC, the student leaders in their respective portfolios, and then most importantly, the students who are the heartbeats of the institution at which you all. So as introduced, I am Andy Mtembu. So it's a true honor to stand before you today alongside the giants and specialists who've dedicated the intellectual energy to advance decolonization. So before I start, I'd like to echo the room, Prof. Brown, and commend you and your team, as well as the student governance, for dedicating this program to the students. for it is their voice, their passion, and their persistency that have kept this issue of decolonization, and I can confirm that the students have kept this idea of decolonization alive and urgent within this academic space. So let me just take it back from the first time that we had a student engage program or meaningful with the student was when we, as the South African Student Association, hosted a call of student leaders from various political structures, where we had a conversation that centered on student leadership's perspective on Africanization, on higher education, which was we also had Dr. Mzuleni, who powerfully led that engagement. We then broadened this dialogue during the International Education Week at Tupeluzulu Hall, where we wanted to add more students in the engagement, where the students themselves took the lead in engaging on the theme of building an African university through collaboration and partnership. These were not just symbolic conversation, they were a stepping stone of what to come, the foundations of today's engagement. So today we need to, and I think that the students have already alluded to that we need to take this conversation further as the students have done so. I'd like to open by Tungo, also by Bogi, question that you once posed to say, what are the means to which we break through the colonial library and construct our own archive of knowledge? As we have heard, the students have constantly expressed the need for concrete actions, transforming the curriculum, which was said just now, integrating African epistemologies, affirming indigenous languages as legitimate carriers of knowledge, and building institutional culture that reflect an African worldview. I think that was what was expressed by the students in the engagement. So today, we need to move forward from rhetoric to action. So the question is no longer what we want, but I think the students have made it clear. The question is, what must we do? So one of the tangible actions, I think there's many, is that we propose a creation of a monumental decolonization park here at the University of Zulu. We already know that there are other symbolic spaces that of reflection, such as the Freedom Park in Pretoria. So we already also our university does not have a park at all. So the absence of such a space is an opportunity for us to pioneer something unique and living, breathing sight of memory, identity, and consciousness. One would ask why a park, Andy? Because symbolism matters. Professor Gajeni reminds us that decolonization is about epistemic freedom, the right to think, theorize, interpret, and write from where you are, in your own language, in your own history. So a decolonization park will serve as a physical reminder of this vision, a space where African languages, indigenous knowledge, and symbolic art converge and inspire both students and academics. Imagine walking through a park where students, murals, and symbolic architecture reflect African philosophies, from Ubuntu to Pan-Africanism, where pathways named after African intellectuals and freedom fighters, where study circles allow students and staff to share indigenous wisdom, where the flora is carefully selected to reflect local indigenous plants, each carrying its own story of resilience. So this park will serve as a daily reminder of our collective responsibility to transform and Africanize knowledge. Students and staff will not just study decolonization in theory, they will inhabit it in practice. Such a park will strengthen our identity as the University of Zulu, not just a university located in Africa, as one of my fellow students, colleagues echoed, but a truly an African university. The park will be a teaching space, a living curriculum where lectures will hold seminars under trees, drawing connection between African philosophy and the land itself, where students could engage in research and create projects that are linked with the symbolic park. A decolonization park will set the University of Zulu apart from the continental leader in transforming academic space, but it will not join the conversation about African university. It will model what it looks like to embody African thought physically, culturally, and epistemologically. So as Achille and Weber reminds us from, decolonization of knowledge cannot be separated from rethinking of public space. So by creating this path, the University of Zulu would answer this call, showing that decolonization is not just about what happens in lecture halls, but also what surrounds us, inspires us, and grounds us. So let me emphasize this, Prof, that this is not just a distant dream, but it's what the students have envisioned. It's a call from the very constituents who this university belongs to. The young people who will carry Africa's intellect and cultural forward. We must always remember that building African universities is not simply about rejecting what is colonial, but affirming what is ours. So by leveraging African language as legitimate mediums of knowledge, for grounding indigenous wisdom, and erecting spaces of African symbolism like the decolonization path, we can transform this institution into a space of thought for African thought. A university that does not only teach Africa, but teaches from Africa, in Africa, and for Africa. As I close, I would like to borrow a quote from Ngugi that says, open quotes, decolonization is not a moment, it's a continuous act of planting seeds that grows into people, close quotes. So let us as students and academics together plant the seeds for those, let's plant one of those seeds today. Let us grow them into a path that reminds us of who we are and where we are going. With those words, let the conversation flow. Thank you so much.
It's very nice to hear from one of you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ire, for bringing the views, the student views into the discussion, conversation. He has indicated the role you intend to play, which is a major one, that your vision in decolonizing. Just before we move to the next um, issue, can I ask one or two questions for Adile so that he feels he also can answer questions? One or two. You have the microphone. Yes. Oh.
I will use and Oliver Taiwo, Nigeria, and really, Bernardo Masolino focus on we should focus on the internal things rather than the external result. So, Bernardo Masolino, he said that we rather focus on the internal things that is happening within South Africa. We cannot blame colonialism for everything that is happening in Africa. Recently, the latest statistics says that Nigeria, Kenya, Morocco, Egypt are one of the countries that there is a lowest quality of life. So why we focus on the decolonization rather than focus on the things that is happening in South Africa? We have gender-based violence that is happening in South Africa. Femicide. Now the issue happening in Fortune. We're going to rather focus on the decolonization while our children are being killed outside there. We're going to focus on the decolonization while our residents, as much as like to say that, we're going to focus on the decolonization. While we have the issue of red cartels in South Africa. So, while Oliver Taiwo says that this thing of decolonization is empowering. So, while we continue focusing on the decolonization, while it's empowering, one of the talks about the issue of youth This would ask in terms of strategy. Why I come from the Zimbabwe. Why we continue to use the issue to us in terms of strategy? Why people that come from Nigeria, Morocco? Some of the students are
Your question is very clear and it will be answered too. One more question so that the answer can be okay. It has been cut off. The majority say no. Let's hear a response from a comment or a response.
That's a quick one. The reason why we have all these problems can be traced to the fact that we have been taught not to respect each other. The issue of self-hate. In the African society, women were respected. And what we have now, because of the commercialization that comes with the Decolonisation, the destruction of the black family is part of what the apartheid and colonialism is reform. And it has made all the problems that we have. So when we start each other as fellow human beings, not as subhuman, then we will be able to understand some of this knowledge. So the connection for you will not be obvious, but it is actually there. And this is why the first target was to make sure that the African ends up becoming a person who doubts himself, who would respect his own culture. In terms of the Zulu culture, for instance, what you also will learn is the respect of women. But once you move away from there, once this culture gets destroyed, you end up with all these things. The notion of adults raping children was unheard ever in an African society. And even when I grew up, it was unheard of. But because of the system of exploitation that we have, we end up with all these knowledge. And if we go back to our rituals, our values, and all that, you discover how much we are wrong. And that's why once you are dehumanized, you are going to dehumanize another person. So until such time that we have a sense of self-worth, we'll not be able to address some of the problems, social problems that we have.
As a program director, I take this opportunity to thank you for your response, the way you have responded. Your guidance is very important. It shows that you have taken the subject very serious, and as we say, we look for solutions from you. So I thank you very much for the attendance, and I hope in future calls and seminars you will be in such attendance, and we all recognize that. Also, the responses that have come from the speakers, they have provoked your thoughts. So as you be leaving from this point, continue thinking and engaging in that regard. We now reach at the point where I call upon vote of thanks and closure to be done by none other than the deans of the students. The let's give you, Dr. Tepo, a good clap.
Thank you very much, Professor Joe. I don't have anything to say much, except to really convey our gratitude to our guest speakers here, Professor Siepe, Professor Ndebaki. We know how tight their schedule is, but when we knocked at their doors and requested them to come over here to share some perspective on the issues of African thought, we really accepted us. Thank you very much, Prof. And also Professor Brown, our own DVC engagement and teaching. Thank you very much for for being our support in making sure that this event takes place. And of course, our student leadership that we engage with and the student population in general. This is our very first seminar that directly involves students. The institution has already, I'm sure you're aware, already started with this engagement through the business webinars where Professor Seattle led, and I'm sure most of you have had the opportunity really to listen to that and to acquaint yourself with those engagements. So this will be not the last one. We are going to have a series of them so that we can reach better than this. Thank you very much for the time. I'm requested here, we are requested here to follow our social media pages and YouTube in order for you to get information if at your later time you want to listen and maybe prepare for future engagements. Thank you.
We have to recognize our guests for the good work they have done. So you join me as we receive appreciation present here. So you want to go ahead.
It is our custom at the university to give our visitors thank you gift, and this is what we are going to do now. Let me call Professor Silogan. Silogan? Professor Silogan to come forward. That was Professor Silogan. So now Professor Kessler. Please, thank you. Andile. Very well, Andile. We certainly look forward to the fact. And then finally, our MC, Professor Duco. All right. I think with that, it's my honor to close the event and to invite you now for lunch somewhere. Just before you go, could you come and
Hello everyone. Can you please remain seated in the hall and then we will be set inside. There's just a bit of delay, about 10 minutes, so please don't panic.